All right. Welcome back. Chapter 6. Here we go. Unit 2. This next unit is chapter 6 through 9. So only 4 chapters on this test. And we are, if you look at the date right there, it is 1608. So it's kind of rewinding back a little bit. But the reason for that is we're looking at a different empire, the French Empire. And that is really going to directly lead into the American Revolution. So that's kind of why they did the timing like that. Okay, so at this point, even by this map, what you'll notice is in America, you've got the British Empire, the French Empire, and the Spanish. Those are the 3 big dogs. And it's funny, it kind of keeps coming back a little bit like that. Okay, so let's get going. When I used to teach world history, this guy was very important, Louis the 14th. And I like to ask students, when they see this picture, what do you think he was like? And he's a very extravagant guy. Have you heard of the Palace of Versailles, for example? If not, Google it, but not now, because you're listening to my lecture. Palace of Versailles, though, it totally is the word extravagant. It's huge, and it was really just his side palace. And anyway, that was him. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the French Revolution and why that matters. But one, I guess you could say, positive thing of Louis XIV is he's going to issue this edict, proclamation, Edict of Nantes. And in that, he's going to basically give some religious tolerance because there's a ton of religious conflict going on in France, just like a lot of other places at that time, because you have the Catholics versus the Protestants. Same thing that we talked about in England and in Germany. So the clashing there. So my point is, we talked about religion being a reason that people move. Well, same kind of idea here in France, but a little bit less so. Okay, let me move my face here. There we go. All right, Samuel de Champlain. Here's my French accent for you. Madame Browning, you should be proud. Okay, he is going to be known for basically finding New France. New France is going to become Canada, right? So Quebec here is basically the first permanent settlement in Canada. What would be the similar place in the British colonies? I heard you said Jamestown. Good job. Okay, so Quebec is going to be one of the strongest places, settlements eventually. And when the French get here, I think we already talked about this, is that they have a very big economic motive. Because don't forget, Canada is cold. Well, they kind of accidentally get brought into these Indian wars, these Native American wars. You got the Hurons versus the Iroquois. And the Hurons are going to be where they are. And if you are in an area and you want something they have, aka the fur that we'll talk about later, you are going to want to potentially befriend them. And the reason for that is because, I think we said this already as well, that they realized that the Native Americans are very skilled at getting beaver, and it would take a long time to learn that skill. So they're going to befriend the Indians, I guess is a befriend. I use that lightly. And because they befriend them, they take on their enemy. So they take on the Iroquois, and unfortunately, that means pretty much for life now that they're enemies of the Iroquois, which is kind of going to haunt them later. Okay? All right. So Canada is going to become New France, and even later when France gets pushed out of Canada, still today there's a very strong French presence. Obviously, French is still spoken largely there. So, fast forwarding. Okay, so why beaver? Well, if you look at these beautiful hats over here, beaver was considered beautiful. Not just was it beautiful, though, it was warm. And think about our winters. Think about Canada's winters, and I think about England and how they don't have heat like we have, and they complain and all that stuff. So the beaver hat is going to basically be kind of the big financial motive for Canada, essentially. Now, you're going to have kind of two groups of Canadians that are going to come over and try and get rich off of this. Coureurs de Bois and the Voyageurs. They're essentially both going to be hunters of the beavers. The difference here is that the Voyageurs are going to be a little bit more official. They have licenses to do this. So a little bit more respected, I guess you could say. But both of them are going to massively hunt the beaver and work with the Native Americans to hunt the beavers. And that hunting beaver is going to really take them everywhere. If you look here in the green, they're going to explore all these different areas and essentially wipe out the beaver in those areas, unfortunately. But that is part of the reason that, if you look on here, the French Empire is so big, it's because hunting took them there. Now that, if you compare that to the British, if you look at the British Empire there, it's a lot smaller because agriculture doesn't take them as far as quickly. You're going to be a little bit more settled, right? Okay. Another group that's going to help kind of push the French Empire to be bigger are the Jesuits. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before. But they are basically Catholic missionaries, essentially. And yeah, so trying to spread Catholicism. Okay, Detroit becomes one of the forts that they establish. Like, there's Detroit right there. Fun fact, okay, ready? Detroit today is known as blank city. Motor, I heard it. Motor City. And it was founded by a guy named Cadillac. Ha! Cool. Is it? I think so. Okay. Alright, and then you're going to have LaSalle. Have you heard of LaSalle? He's going to come down basically the Mississippi River and is going to establish this area down here, which he's going to call Louisiana. Just so you know, Louisiana is going to be known not for what it is today, but really this huge, come on, where's my mouse? There we go. Kind of this huge whole territory down here. But Louisiana, he's going to name it that in honor of King Louis. Alright? And New Orleans is going to be a huge, huge port. We're going to talk about that city and that port again later in another war. But if you think about this whole area that they control, there we go, is if they find this beaver fur and they want to bring it down the Mississippi, now they have a huge port that connects them down here to the Caribbean. So that's a huge area right there, or a huge port. Okay? Okay. Because they're greedy and these big empires, that they're going to clash. Okay? Didn't see that one coming. And just so you know, at this, in the 1600s and 1700s, there's a lot of world wars. And the colonists are going to get dragged into it. Because colonies tend to be a part of wars. We're even going to talk about that in like World War I and World War II, and how colonies are a part of wars. Because that's how countries flex their muscles, or colonies, right? Okay, so the first one here we're going to talk about, and I do want to say something. Today we're talking about a couple wars. The big thing that the AP talks about, and this is the same thing for the Revolutionary War and World War I and World War II. They don't really care about specific battles. They care more about causes of the wars and effects. Same thing, yeah, with like American Revolution. They would know causes and effects. They're not going to ask specific ones, usually. Okay, that being said, so King William's War and Queen Anne's War are basically two wars fought in Europe that bleed over here into the colonies. Who's it against? So it's basically the French colonists versus the British colonists, essentially. There's not a lot of money or resources put into it from Europe. Okay, but ultimately they are going to sign the Treaty of Utrecht at the end. And again, this is kind of the more important effect here. Let me go show you this. Okay, so sorry. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. Spain is going to join with France. Okay, there's the key part. Spain's going to join with France. And because if you remember, rewind, there's a lot of alliances going on in Europe at this time. And if you remember, England beat Spain, right, pretty recently. So that's part of the reason. Okay, but anyway, look up here, over here, and basically the British colonists are going to defeat France and Spain kind of together. They're going to use this area up here, and they're going to call it Nova Scotia. And in the end of those wars, okay, the Treaty of Utrecht, what has changed in this map from the last map? Two things. Okay, up here, Hudson Bay, this whole area is now British. And then over here, up a little bit north, Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. And why that's important, okay, if you look at that location right there, that is the entryway. Why is my mouse not working? Okay, this is the entryway to get to the French Empire. So if the British are going to control the entryway, that's a big deal, right? That's a huge loss for the French. Okay, all right, so now the British have definitely gained a lot of ground in North America. Okay, now I've already talked about salutary neglect. So this time frame after this war is going to, basically the British are going to be a little bit more hands-off, right? Not really enforcing laws. The War of Jenkins' Ear, so basically why this matters, try not to go into all these details of these wars that you don't need to know. Is the War of Jenkins' Ear is going to be between the British and the Spanish. Really, it's only located in the Caribbean. That's really the only area where they're fighting over. It's going to lead to King George's War. Okay, ready? So significance here is the British are going to win again. All right, but there's just going to be, what's left is this hostility between France and Spain and England. That's kind of the result here, is there's nothing settled. Okay, we already talked about that. Okay, so now let's get into the actually important war of this chapter. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, which it was more commonly called that in Europe. But this was, so Europe's the main stage, and the colonists, what's interesting about this is actually the colonists are going to start this larger war in Europe. Usually it's the other way around. Okay, so let's look here. I'm sorry. Okay, I do want to show you this. So this is that last map we talked about. The most important area of this map that the French and the British are going to fight over is this right here. Come on. Here we go. This is going to be known as the Ohio River Valley. Why is this so important? Why do both of these empires want this? Okay, well, France, why did France want it? So they can connect up here in the north to down here in the New Orleans port. And they want to be able to basically float their supplies down here so they can sell it that way. Okay? Now, why does the British want this area? Because this is like prime fertile area. And the British are doing so well, and the population's growing, and now they want to go westward. But the French are there. Okay, so it's basically coming down to something's going to be the spark here. And the spark is at Fort Duquesne. And this is when actually George Washington steps onto the stage. And who knows if the governor of Virginia hadn't asked Washington to step up here, maybe he never becomes the leader that becomes so huge in American history, right? or maybe if he was killed in this, which was very likely, then the whole course of America's independence has changed, right? Who knows? Okay, so what happens here? Fort Duquesne. So Fort Duquesne is a French fort, and as you see, it's like right on the border of the British colonist area and the French. Well, it's over disputed territory, and the British think it's theirs. So the Virginia governor, here's Virginia down here, is going to send Washington over to basically take control of it. Washington, I think you've read this already, is that his family has a lot of money, and a lot of money comes power. So that's kind of how he gets to be known. All right, so he basically heads over to Fort Duquesne, and along the way he meets some French and fires guns, and boom, he kills some, and the French retreat. Victory dance, Washington's awesome. Actually, that's not true. He was not a great general, actually. He was a great leader. We'll talk more about that later, but when it comes to actual warfare, he wasn't that great. Okay, so what ends up happening, he sets up a fort. Come on. Okay, here we go. Fort Necessity. And basically he's going to set that up to eventually attack Fort Duquesne and get the French away. So necessity, it's kind of necessity. It's not a great fort at that time. All right, so what's going to happen is basically the French are going to retaliate and come at them and surround them and destroy them. But they actually do let them retreat with honor and go back. But that's what I'm saying. What if he was killed there? He easily could have been killed there. But the French were a little bit noble in war there. Okay. But that is going to kickstart the 7 Years' War in Europe. And when I say Europe, I should elaborate. Is Europe, as in obviously America. It's in the West Indies, because that's obviously a big place we've talked about. The Philippines, Africa, where these little colonial outposts are. So it's everywhere. Think like World War I, World War II, in more modern history, this is it back then. It's a huge war. All right, the two sides. Britain and Prussia. Have you heard Prussia before? Prussia is kind of this huge area that eventually will mostly become Germany. Fun fact. So they are going at France, Spain, Austria, and Russia. Okay. Now, I do want to say that in this huge war, most of the attention is going to be on Europe. There's not going to be a ton of resources sent out to America. So really, it's up to the colonists now to decide if they want to fight for themselves here. Okay, you've probably seen this before, or at least you've heard this before. Join or die. There's a big misconception about this. Most people think, most people think that this is the American Revolution. And it is not. So next time I'm sure you hear people talk about this all the time. Tell them, nope, sorry, misconception. This is actually for the French and Indian War. Okay, what do you notice here? Is anything missing? Okay, two things should stick out here. Or two colonies were missing. What are they? Georgia. Georgia's missing, and Delaware. Why? We don't know. But fun fact. Okay, who did this? Benjamin Franklin at the Albany Congress, or for the Albany Congress. We'll talk about the second. And it was in his Pennsylvania Gazette, which was kind of the most popular pamphlet right at that time. Okay, so his message here, join or die, is for the Albany Congress. And really, the idea behind it is we need to join together, these colonies, or we die. Pretty straightforward. Now, the Albany Congress they're going to meet in New York, near the Iroquois. And the goal, number one, the biggest goal is we need to get the Iroquois on our side. Because if we get them, P.S. French and Indian War. I think people get confused, and I guess it should be French and British War, but it's called French and Indian War because both sides pick up Native American tribes to fight with them. So the colonies are realizing, the British colonies are realizing we need the Native Americans on our side, so that's why this Albany Congress meets, and they've actually given these huge gifts and wagon loads of gifts to try and woo them over. Now, the secondary purpose is obviously unification of the colonies, come together. Well, at this Congress, 7 of the 13 come. Now, is that good? I would argue yes. There hasn't really been a huge step towards colonial unity. If you think back to like Dominion, Dominion New World, you only have like the northern colonies uniting. This is the first time where it's an effort to get all 13, but 7 show up. Okay, fun fact, they actually decide, oh, we should become independent. That's kind of the first time that's ever come out, independence, but it gets shot down. Alright, so let's talk about the war. I would say 2 big things other than how it began, right? Edward Braddock, he is kind of in charge at the beginning, and he's like, okay, we're going back to Fort Duquesne, where we got humiliated, but guess what? He gets defeated and humiliated again. The French win that one. And eventually Bragg dies, and the next man up. The next man is William Pitt. Ever heard of Pitt before? I bet you have. Sorry, Pittsburgh. Okay. William Pitt is really the one who's going to be known for turning the war around in the British favor. And he's going to pick James Wolfe, a younger general, and the Battle of Quebec is really what's going to win it. So in the past, what's gone wrong with the colonists fighting, like in King George's War and Queen Anne's War, is they've gone for these little forts. Well, here, they're going for the main arteries. And those 2 main arteries would be Quebec and Montreal, the big cities. Because really, if you can take down the big cities, then all the little cities will kind of wither away. And that's usually a goal of war. Like, for example, in the War of 1812, D.C. is burned. I get too far ahead of us. Okay. All right. Anyway, the Battle of Quebec, the British are going to win, the colonists are going to win, and this is going to lead to the Treaty of Paris. Get ready. There's a lot of Treaty of Paris. Sure. Treaties of Paris. That's better. Anyway, there's a couple things here. In this treaty, Louisiana is given to Spain. Alright, so that big area. Okay. Move my face here. Alright, so this big area, this is Louisiana. Like I told you, it was big. Now look, there's no green here anymore. This area is given to Spain. Now, why the heck would France give it to Spain? They just lost to the British. Well, this is saying you put so much effort in, you put so much resources in, this is what we'll give our allies. Now, what did they lose to the British? So look, if you look, all this, you got this Ohio River Valley, all of this Canada area, and then one big thing here is now Florida is part of the British Empire. Because actually Spain is going to give Florida to the colonists in exchange, or to Britain in exchange for Cuba. Okay? Cool. Now, this is a huge change in North America, obviously. So really now you just have the British versus Spain now. But the moral of the story is the British Empire here to stay. They're huge. I shouldn't say that. The British Empire is not here to stay. The British colonists are here to stay. Now, a couple aftermaths. If you think about this in a large scale, about this war, this is the beginning of unity. they have a long, long way to go until they decide to get towards the American Revolution. Now, if this is the beginning of unity, there's still a lot of things pressing against them to not be unified. Ready? Let's think about it. Obviously, geography. Geography today doesn't mean much because we can hop in a car or a plane. But we talked about these roads and huge distances to overcome when you don't have cell phones. Okay? So, geography. Religion. Religion is very different. We talked about that in New England versus the South. Government styles, even that's very different, and tolerance and not tolerance, and true democracy. Economics, they're very different economically. So it's not kind of cohesive to come together. They're also going to be very different in loyalty to England. We talked about that too, right? Who's more loyal to England? The South is. And the North and the immigrants and the middle colonies don't have as much loyalty. Did I get everything? I feel like I'm missing something. I don't know. Probably did. Okay, another big aftermath is during the war, the British officials are going to basically look down on the colonists. So you're going to have the British fighting with the colonists. The British officers are going to kind of rule most of the local militias, the colonists, and they're going to treat them pretty badly. Look down upon them, talk down to them, and it's going to create some resentment here. How it's also going to show the colonists, if you see British people dying and British people hovering and scared for their life, you're going to realize, wait a second, the British aren't these like huge Hulk heroes that are invincible. So they're going to basically see the beginning of British, what's that called? I don't know the term here. A tweak in their armor. There's a word there. Whatever. It's going to bother me. Don't know it. Okay. All right. Pontiac's uprising. So, let's go to this map real quick. Yep. Okay, over here. One of the biggest benefits for the Native Americans on having multiple empires there is that if the French aren't giving you the deal you want, you can go to the British or the Spanish. Well, now they can't play off the French as much. So they're a little bit at a disadvantage. So Pontiac is going to be this chief who decides, like, we need to make our move now. We need to let them know our presence now, and before they get going even more so. And they want this Ohio River Valley, but we want it to. Anyway, he's going to basically gather this uprising of Native Americans, and they basically go out and destroy a ton of colonists and towns. The result, though, is not necessarily maybe what they had hoped for, because the colonists are just going to come right back at them. The British are going to send, this is depressing, blankets to them with smallpox on them. It's biological warfare there. And it's actually really going to weaken them. The moral of the story, though, is not necessarily that they defeated them entirely. It's actually that the British realized, shoot, we need to figure out what we're going to do with this Native American problem. So they come up with this solution. The Proclamation Line of 1763. All right. So this proclamation line right here is in red. And what they tell the colonists and the Native Americans is that the colonists cannot cross over and settle past that red line. Now, the colonists, well, actually, let's go with the British view. Why did they do it? They did it to hopefully protect their colonies, essentially, right? We need to figure out something that's fair for both the Native Americans and the colonists. Now, what do the colonists think? Excuse me. colonists think that they just fought for all this land, and yet now that the British are holding them down, right? Remember, they're kind of bursting at the seams here. They want to get out into the West, but the French were there. So now this is our time. And so they viewed this as kind of an authoritarian power move from the British. Fun fact is they actually don't listen. They cross this line and they don't listen. But, again, two things here is, one, they see the British as overreaching their kind of rule. And number two is they don't listen to it. And so that really sets them up in the future for the American Revolution of not listening to some of their acts. All right. Cool. That's it. That was a kind of a short chapter. Get ready. All righty, guys. I will see you tomorrow.